was a very, very big part of my preparation and my labor. The playlists that I used are research-backed in supporting the different stages of labor. And so what I would do is I would pick a playlist and kind of match it to the preparation I wanted to do for that evening. So if I was in the bathtub, I would choose meditation music. If I was doing yoga, I would maybe do relaxation, so something that was a little bit more upbeat, not quite meditative, but still relaxing. If I was moving on the ball, then I would choose something that had a little bit more of like an imagery kind of backing to it. And so I used a lot of music for the whole thing.
Getting pregnant and giving birth are two of the most exciting things you can ever hope to experience in this life. The moment you think you could be pregnant, you're frantically searching for all the best information, which is why you're here today. I'm Stephanie King, and with my many years of experience as a professional childbirth educator, doula, and lover of all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, I'm here to make preparing for your birth enjoyable, empowering, and totally easy. Each week, I'll cover different topics, interview professionals, and get into the nitty-gritty birth stories from mamas just like you. And when you're ready for more, you can join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I take you step by step through exactly how to prepare your mind, body, spirit, and partner for a birth you love. So let's get started. This week's reviewer of the week is from LMP from MI, Michigan, right? I'm going to go with Michigan. Anyways, she says, Fearless Birth, thanks to this podcast. I wanted to reach out and personally thank you for all of the work that you put into your web course and podcast. I listen to your podcast every day throughout my recent pregnancy, and I know that it made a significant difference in my pregnancy and labor. I am a first-time mama and got to have the home birth of my dreams next to my husband, mom, and doula and midwife. Oh, that's awesome that your mom was your doula. I absolutely love that. Throughout my first trimester, I was so anxious about labor and delivery and was so uneducated in all aspects of birth. Thanks to your podcast, not only was I empowered to have my baby at home, but it was unmedicated too. And despite complications and almost needing to transfer to the hospital, I had so much peace and confidence throughout every contraction. My whole labor was only 9 hours, with pushing for just over 1 hour. My midwife said if baby hadn't been in a posterior position, she would have missed my birth. I know not everyone gets to have a birth like this, but I know my experience is thanks to the preparations I made from listening to your online course and podcast. Thank you. Thank you so much for that incredible review. I'm super happy to hear that you guys are listening and doing the work and finding the providers that are going to suit you well so you have these incredible experiences. So what a blessing to be able to share that with other women now. And along with that, today I have a birth story for you as well. And so we have with us Patricia, who, same thing, my Essential Birth course student and also podcast listener, but also had an incredible birth that she is here to share. So with that, Patricia, will you take a moment and introduce yourself? Tell us a little about you.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Patricia Allison. I am a music therapist here in West Virginia. I just gave birth to my baby boy in August, so we are almost 6 months out. And yeah, I listened to the podcast and did the birth course with my husband and used all of the things. And I'm really excited to be here and talk about my experience.
Well, we're excited to have you, and thank you for taking your time to join us. With that, will you tell us a little bit about this pregnancy, your last pregnancy, what it was like for you? Was it pretty straightforward? Did you have any weird symptoms or things like that? And then kind of throughout your pregnancy, did you come up to any testing that was weird? Did you change providers? Anything like that?
Yeah, so my pregnancy was pretty easy. I will say it took us a while to get there. We did IVF. So we did IVF after some failed IUIs and things like that. And so once we got to this point, I'm not sure if it was excitement that kind of just like quilted everything. But I didn't have a lot of symptoms. I didn't have cravings. I didn't really have morning sickness. I got sick, I think, 1 or 2 times in the beginning. But other than that, it was very, very straightforward, which was lovely. But yeah, I did have and I'm going to try to pronounce this correctly. Nope, I'm not even going to try. Succenturate lobe. I looked at the word. I wrote it down because I knew I was going to have to say it. I asked my provider to say it for me every single time I went in and still can't remember how to say it. But basically, it was an accessory lobe that wasn't attached to the placenta. And so that was really the only thing that popped up that was kind of like concerning. But everyone around me wasn't as concerned about it, I think, as I was. But it wasn't. It was just attached by a blood vessel, and they couldn't quite tell how far apart it was from the actual placenta. And so I think for me, the biggest thing was just the question mark of like, it could be on the back and on the front, or on the back and right beside it, and like where that was and what the risk was going into it. But everyone else was pretty like, oh yeah, that's normal. And then
so what things were you concerned about with that, if you don't mind me asking? Like,
Sure.
What were the concerns that went along with that?
So the biggest concern for me was that it has an increased risk of hemorrhaging because the blood vessels could bust while you're pushing, or if the blood vessels went down, from what I understand, went down over the cervical opening and the baby went down, the blood vessels would break. And I had wanted to have a home birth, and so just that increased risk of hemorrhaging. And I'm in a rural area, so the hospital that was equipped to handle something like that was 25 minutes away. And so just kind of navigating like that, the choice of accepting that risk or, trying to plan hand as much as we could. And our midwife was wonderful about explaining that and making sure that I felt confident and educated in my choices. So yeah, that was the biggest concern, was just the risk of hemorrhage.
Can I ask, this is your first baby, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And IVF. I know there are IVF moms listening here that they're told all kinds of things. I'm sure that you went through all kinds of conversations with different providers. What was it that sparked your interest about having a home birth, or even made you think to talk to home birth midwives?
Sure. So it definitely was not from a place of mistrust of the hospital systems. My mom is an ER nurse, and actually my choice to have home birth was like terrifying for her. She, sure. She's very, medically based and in her mindset. And so honestly, I have always wanted to have a home birth. I am not sure what sparked it, but since we have started trying to get pregnant, I wanted to do a home birth. And initially I thought I would have one birth in the hospital first and just see how it went and then try it at home. But with us doing IVF and having a limited number of opportunities to have kids in the future, I decided that if I wanted to do it, I could do it now. I didn't have to do the hospital birth first and get the experience kind of like I, had thought I needed to do in order to be successful at it. So, yeah, I just decided we've waited so long. This is what I want. I have never been a fan of hospitals, even though my mom is a nurse and I've spent a lot of time at the hospital just, with her and at work. And I, my home is my safe space. And I really felt confident in, my ability to navigate labor, especially with my partner, and having my mom present at the birth was comforting too with her training. So yeah, I just was like, no, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to do it this time.
Yeah, that is so awesome. So with these providers, is there just like one midwife in your area? Were they recommended to you? Did you seek them out? Like, what was that experience like for you? Did you interview a few?
Yeah, I did a Google search for midwives in West Virginia, and I came upon a website that had a list of some of them, but not many were in my area. And actually, our midwife that we chose, Maureen Farrell, she was on the podcast, a friend of the pod.
So cool.
It was really cool. I actually had hired her before I listened to that episode. And when I was listening, I was like, wait a second. Awesome. Wait a second. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, I just did a Google search, and she ended up being one of the closest ones to me, which was still 2 hours away.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't really interview others. And I think even if I had, I would still have chosen Maureen. She was absolutely wonderful, absolutely fit, the kind of vibe I was going for my birth. And she was just lovely, lovely human, fantastic midwife. So yeah, but I did continue with awesome. traditional medical OB care at the request of my mom. And and so I did get to go and meet some of the providers in the area. The thing that's really challenging about West Virginia, and especially my area of West Virginia, we have the University Hospital over in Morgantown, and they pretty much own all of the hospitals in the area. And so even if you go to one, it's the same policies and procedures at the other. There's two big hospitals like that kind of own all the hospitals in the area.
It does make it a little trickier.
It does. And there are absolutely options, but none that I was willing to. I was already committing to a 2-hour drive to go see my midwife. I didn't want to commit to another 2-hour, hour drive to see the doctor. And so I just went to the hospital that was about 25 minutes from me. But it was interesting because my first appointment was with the midwife at the hospital, and absolutely loved that experience. And when I had told her about, I'm going to backtrack really quick because I don't want to give an identity. I don't want her to get in trouble.
Yeah.
When I went to the hospital that we delivered at, I started with a midwife, and they had told me, when I told them I was planning to do a home birth, told me to, maybe not make that known to the other providers because there is a lot of negative connotation around home birth in West Virginia. And so that was really surprising. So I kind of went to these appointments, and it was challenging because I wasn't able to ask specific questions that I have. Like, is this something that would make my risk of a home
if
birth?
I transfer.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And so it was challenging to kind of navigate that. But, and then I ended up switching to doctors because we found out that the midwives at the hospitals can't deliver babies anymore. They're not allowed. So, yeah, it was an insurance thing.
Do you know why?
Insurance. They can't bill.
That's that makes no sense to me. That's insane.
Yeah.
Wow.
Birth in West Virginia is still very much at least in this area, in my relationships, it's very much I'm going to do what the doctor tells me to do. I'm just here. I'm not going to make a birth plan because my doctor knows the best, which is not inaccurate. Doctors are wonderful. And, if you find a good provider that you trust, fantastic. But there's not a lot of education. There's not a lot of empowerment for birthing mothers to kind of take control of that. It's very much I'm a passenger in this experience.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank goodness for other midwives
that
are there to support.
Absolutely.
Yes. That's amazing. Little tricky if you end up not being low risk and able to birth with them. But it's good information. It's good for moms to know. That's crazy to me. Like, what would be so many questions. I'm like,
I know,
how come the midwife can take care of all your care and then she can't, I don't understand. It's not computing.
Yeah. Off the record, I'm pretty sure it was because the doctors were losing money when midwives would bill. Which is just
ridiculous.
Disgusting.
It's so unsafe and unfair. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Put your fist down. It's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I'm glad that you clarified some of that because I was going to ask you, what were these hospital providers? What did they say when you brought up home birth? But you kind of cleared that one up.
Yeah.
And that's always the tricky part, especially Yeah, perfect, right? But especially because of the IVF side of things, it's like moms are instantly, providers will put them into a higher risk, and that's not necessarily true. And so it's really important to meet with educated people who can help you kind of navigate those things and make you feel good about your body and your decisions and the safety for you and baby, depending on what you decide to do. So
Yeah.
that's really good. That's
And
really awesome.
our hospital providers, they were kind. I don't want to say that there was necessarily a bad experience. And I ended up delivering in the hospital, and everybody that I had was just absolutely wonderful. The appointments with the hospital providers were always very short, which I think was exasperated by the fact that my appointments with Maureen were always an hour, a full hour of questions and talking and exploring the symptoms and things that were happening. And so, like, to move from home birth to the medical side of it was just such a stark contrast. And I remember whenever we got the ultrasound sent us the fact that we had the 6 lobe. Of course, I Googled everything that could go wrong, which don't do that. Because
we all say don't do it, and then we all go do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I knew
Google.
better. Like, I knew what was going to happen, and so I'm panicking because the hospital would send us the results before a doctor would call to talk to us. So I'm sitting there, and I'm Googling, and I'm panicking, and I'm doing all this, and Maureen put my mind at ease. And then at my next appointment, I had expected to talk about it, and I walked in, and appointment, checked me, measured me, whatever. And then he went to leave, and I was like, can we talk about this ultrasound? And he was like, what? He had no idea what I was talking about. And so I was so surprised. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, well, our ultrasound came back with this and this. And I thought that maybe, and then he had, they couldn't get a good measurement of his heart. And so then we had to go and do a echocardiogram, and that was in there too. So it was like all of these things. And I was like, what is going on? Why does this doctor have no idea? And he didn't even look at my chart before he walked in, which was, it was insane.
Yeah, that is crazy to me that those kinds of, I don't know, it just makes you feel more like a number and less like this person cares about what is actually happening with my body and my baby here. It's just we're just running through the checklist, getting through the day. So that's a little tricky. Okay, so you talked about providers. You kind of talked about your pregnancy. Tell me about your birth partner and how he was feeling through all of this and kind of like how you guys prepared together for having a home birth.
Yeah, so when I told my husband I wanted to have a home birth, he's so very go with the flow. He was like, all right. And that was it. I mean, he was wonderful, very supportive.
That's awesome.
Definitely gives me space to explore things that I wanted out of the labor. And he really just was along for the ride. He would do anything that I would ask him to in terms of preparation. He loved the birth course. He really liked the quiz. And
awesome.
So, yeah, he was a big fan of that quantitative, like, I got this.
That's cool.
Yeah. But together we did a lot of practicing different positions and counter pressure, which we actually ended up not using, which I think is crazy. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But he was actually gone for the last almost 2 months of my pregnancy. He went to officer candidate school in Alabama for the military. And so I was on my own for the last 2 months. And so we kind of really, really squeezed in a lot in that second trimester, trying to get everything ready. We would put music on, and we would just kind of relax together. And then we would get the ball out, and we would practice counter pressure on the ball. And sometimes he colored with me. I had these cards that I made for myself, and I would put on some music, and they were like meditative cards. And he would sit there and color with me, and we would just kind of be together. And so I think that was a big part of what I wanted out of him, was not necessarily hands-on because I knew my mom would be there. I knew we would have the midwife. And I also had my friend Shelby, who is training to be a doula, who would be there. And so I kind of didn't really expect for him to have as much of a hands-on role. But I really wanted to get in the headspace of just, that presence and just that connection of just being able to be together. And that is kind of what how it ended up happening was just, he was right there and, holding my hand and just kind of a calm, very rock solid presence, which I was so grateful to have because it was a long and crazy labor.
Talk to me about your preparation real quick before we dive into the birth, just because it sounds like you did a lot of preparing and may or may not have used what you prepped for. And I have some thoughts and I like questions later on for that as well. But tell me, what were those things that you found that were really helpful for you? Things that you listened to or did every day, physical, emotional, mental work, anything that you're like, this is how I prepared that other women can think about and latch onto?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was in school for music therapy, I actually did a training course for music therapy assisted child labor. And so music was a very, very big part of my preparation and my labor. The playlists that I used are research backed in supporting the different stages of labor. And so what I would do is I would pick a playlist and kind of match it to the preparation I wanted to do for that evening. So if I was in the bathtub, I would choose meditation music. If I was doing yoga, I would maybe do relaxation. So something that was a little bit more upbeat, not quite meditative, but still relaxing. If I was moving on the ball, then I would choose something that had a little bit more of like an imagery kind of backing to it. And so I used a lot of music for the whole thing. And then I did the 3 daily exercises, and I actually had a song or a playlist that I would do the daily exercises to, because at some point the inversion was really hard for me. And so I had to have something else to focus on other than like myself. And just how not uncomfortable, but just not comfortable, I guess, I had gotten. And so just the power of music to distract was a great tool. And then, I did some coloring for some cards. I ended up not using the cards, but they were a nice way to familiarize myself with the music. So I don't think I really ever had any intention to use the cards other than just to, get myself in that headspace and practice these mantras as I was coloring them. And then my husband and I, like I said, we had did the evening practices. Sometimes he would just sit with me while I did yoga. Sometimes we would do the counter pressure. But yeah, I tried to do something every day, whether that just be sitting in water, because we had the birth tub and I knew I wanted the tub. And then in the summer, because he was gone in the summer and it was me by myself, I bought an inflatable pool and put it outside and sat in that and listened to my meditation music a lot. Spent a lot of time in that blow up pool. It was great. It has a bench on one side. I bought like a little filter so that the water would keep moving in it so it wouldn't get stagnant, and I got like a filter and a net and everything for this just like little blow up pool in my yard because I didn't want to have to empty it out and fill it up every single day because I was in it every single day. So water was another big one that I used to prepare.
That's awesome. I actually really like that a lot. Was there anything that you did for your body as you were getting closer to labor, anything that your midwife recommended or things that you had used like red raspberry tea or evening primrose oil or anything to prep your body for labor?
Yeah, so I did the red raspberry leaf tea pretty much from 32 weeks on. I think I drank it 2 or 3 times a day, and then even more. It turned to iced tea in June. I did that, and then I did the dates. And I started out really liking the dates, and then it got to the point that I absolutely hated the dates. And it was so strange how that happened because they tasted the same. I just did not want them. So then we got creative I started making them into like different snacks and things like that. But we still did the dates. We made it. But yeah, those were the two big things. And then just trying to get a lot of protein. That was the other thing that I was really trying to, and I would try to stretch my body and things like that. So.
Okay, so let's talk about the birth. And did you have any information coming up to it? Did you choose to have vaginal exams or anything like that? Do you know anything about where your body started and where it ended up throughout the labor, or were you kind of hands off? What did that look like? And then walk us through your birth.
Yeah, I denied all cervical checks. And my husband got home on the 5th or 6th of August, and I went into labor on the morning of the 13th of August. So he was home for a solid week. So that timing could not have been better. Yes. Yeah. I had told him I joked that if I went into labor, I wasn't going to tell him, because it would he was already in a space of like not great mental, military school, all that. I was like, you'll just come home and he'll be here. So I'm very thankful that he made it home. But no, I didn't have any inclination, but I'll tell you what, Blaine knew that I was going into labor. He knew that night. He was going catfishing. It was his first weekend home. He was going out with his buddies. And I don't know if you know anything about catfishing, but the best catfishing is done at night.
Okay.
And so his phone was getting ready to die. And he gave me the phone number of like 2 people that I didn't know. And then his other friend was like, if anything happens, you call one of these numbers. And I was like, Blaine, I remember specifically saying, I'm not going into labor tonight. Go. Have a good time. See you later. Bye. Like, have fun. And he ended up coming home early. It was probably like midnight whenever they got home. And I was like, what are you doing back so early? He said, I just didn't want to be gone. I was like, okay, whatever. We went to bed. And then at about 1:30, I woke up to some contractions, and the bed was wet, and I was like, what on earth, did I like go to the bathroom in my sleep? And so I went to the bathroom and went to use the restroom, and then water kept coming out, and I was like, oh, okay, that's what this is. And so I texted Maureen, and I was like, hey, just so you know, like, I'm good, but I'm pretty sure my water is breaking. And I continued to have some light contractions. I went out and I sat on the couch. They were still really light, really irregular. And I tried so hard to sleep through it, but I was so excited. I could not go back to sleep. It was not discomfort. It was just pure joy. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. So I stayed up for most of the night, just watching TV, trying to sleep here and there. It didn't work. I think I ended up falling back asleep at like 4:30 or 5 and slept until maybe 7. That might even be pushing it. And before I went out and laid down, I told Blaine, bless his heart, he can sleep through anything. Woke him up and I was like, hey, I think I'm having contractions, but it's okay. Go back to sleep. And he kind of just like, yep. And then just went right back to sleep. I was like, oh, the joy, the luxury of that. He was like, okay, I trust you. Good night. So then the next morning, they were almost gone for the first part of the morning. I didn't have any more. And I was like, maybe that was false labor. Maybe that wasn't my water breaking. But as the morning and the day continued, I continued to have water leakage. And I was like, oh, man, no, that's definitely my waters. So I tried pumping to kind of get them started again, and they would go for a little bit while I was pumping, but nothing that stuck around. So we just went for a walk. About 2:00, I think, I texted Maureen, and I had started to have some bleeding whenever I wiped. And so she was like, okay, great. Continued the evening. At about 6, I tried the mile circuit. I couldn't make it through the whole thing, but I was just tired. Like at that point, I was really, really tired because I hadn't slept the night before. So I did like a a half version, I would say, of the mile circuit. And that seemed to pick things up a little bit. But I really didn't have anything consistent. And even then, I'm using air quotes because it wasn't that consistent until about 8 o'clock. And even then, they were like 15 minutes apart, and then 2 minutes apart, and then 7 minutes, and then 20 minutes. Like, I mean, it was like they were so random, which I really wasn't worried about because I know that, you know, and I've heard birth stories on here too, that like it's not always exactly on time, and you can have effective sporadic contractions and them still be, your labor still progressing forward. So I really wasn't that worried about it at that point. I was just glad that they were happening. I was worried that morning when nothing was happening. But I think getting my body moving and you know, doing all that stuff, I think definitely helped. But then, yeah, so since my water had broken and I was starting to get a little bit more consistent, Maureen headed over and was at our house by 10 p.m. Sunday night. And from there, we got some good traction. She came in and gave me these very earthy tasting tinctures to help progress my labor, and they were very effective and equally as gross. Like I did them a couple times, and it was crazy. Like she would put it under my tongue and you had to sit, it had to absorb. So I had to hold it there for a minute, and it just tasted like dirt and, you know, just very not flavorful. And one was worse than the other. But I'll tell you what, my contractions really picked up then, and they were very effective. So, but I guess that's the give and take with it.
Right.
I wish I would have asked her what they were called, but they were very effective. So then she instructed all of us to try and get some sleep. And before this, I had called my mom and my friend Shelby, who was going to be there just because it was starting to be the nighttime and I didn't want to, like, you know, something to happen quickly and they could come and stay the night with us. And that's what they wanted to do anyway. So they were there, and, you know, Maureen was like, all right, everybody, get some sleep. And so we went upstairs. Of course, I did not sleep. Still, I was so tired. I could not fall asleep. I was excited and ready to get the show on the road. And my contractions were pretty regular at this point, and I was really, really focused on timing them and things like that. So I just couldn't sleep. But about 2 o'clock in the morning, I came back downstairs because it was to the point where I needed to groan through them. I had to focus on them. I was getting some really good ones, some really effective contractions. And I came downstairs and I was like, I want the pool. And so they went and they got the pool. And I liked the pool. I wasn't sure if I had wanted to deliver in the pool, but I knew I wanted to labor in the pool because I really liked water. But it was almost too cold for me. And it was the right temperature. But when I take a bath, a hot, hot bath. And I think that that's like what I was so used to using to relax, that like 98-degree water felt so cold. And I felt so bad because my midwife's assistant, Christine, was upstairs boiling pots of water and coming down and pouring them in because our hot water tank didn't have enough in it to fill the tub up. And so it was just a whole big labor of love. And then I was like, oh, this is kind of cold. But I stayed in it. It was still comfortable. At this point, it was like probably 3 by the time I was able to actually like sit and be submerged in the water. It was nice. It was very nice. Because I couldn't get comfortable, and I don't have anything to reference it to but I felt like I had to push the whole time. The whole time my contractions were strong, I felt like I needed to push. And I knew that I didn't, though. Like, logically, I knew that's not what that was. And so if I wasn't in the tub, I was on the toilet pushing. Like, I probably emptied my bowels 30 times throughout my labor, because that was the only thing that gave me any relief. And I think it was from where I didn't have my bag of waters anymore, and so his head was right there. Pure speculation, but I just felt like I needed to like bear down, and that was the only thing that would give me any relief. And so when I was in the water, when I would have a contraction, I would just put my hands underneath of me and push up and kind of like use my core muscles the same way that I would push, but not quite that, not that bearing down feeling. But it was so strange because I couldn't get comfortable. No position I tried was comfortable. No counter pressure was comfortable. Nothing could sway it other than pushing. And I knew I didn't need to push. I was just starting. Like, so that it was weird. It was weird. But yeah, I labored in the water for a little bit, and then at 4, I had been in labor my water had broken for 26 hours. And so this was kind of where we were like, okay, what's our move? And I got out and she checked me, and I was only at a 4. And I was like, oh, my heart just sunk. I was like, oh no. I was hoping I told myself if I'm at a 6 or 7, I'm going to stay at home. I'll stay at home, and if we need to, we can transfer. But I was at a 4. And so they would have let me stay if I wanted to. I wasn't showing any signs of fevering or anything like that. And my contractions were picking up, but I decided I knew the risk of having a bag of water broken for that long. And I knew that it could be just as long to continue to get there, since my contractions were still irregular. I mean, they were coming on stronger, but still inconsistent. So I made the choice to transfer. And I was so convinced I wasn't going to transfer. I did not pack a hospital bag. I do not recommend that to anybody that has a home birth. But I will say, I just had my husband go grab some stuff, and the hospital had everything else that we needed. We, honest to God, like, I just grabbed clothes for myself, or he just grabbed clothes for me, and then like a couple outfits, and that was it. And I was like, man, people worry so much about this hospital bag. But honestly, like, it was the last thing on my mind and the least stressful thing once we were there. But that's how convinced I was that I wasn't going to transfer. But I also then had to decide if I wanted to go to the hospital that was closest to us, or Maureen suggested another hospital that was a little bit further away that is known for being a little bit more hands-off in labor. And I really contemplated it. I really, really thought about it. But then we would have been probably about 45 minutes away from home. And I really just wasn't sure what I would need, like if I would need anything else from home, because I didn't pack a bag. And my parents were close to that hospital, and our friends were close to the other hospital. And so I just decided to do the hospital that I had been going to see the providers there at this hospital. So I did know most of the people. And once we got there, the car ride wasn't too bad. In the car, I was so glad that we didn't choose to go to the other hospital, because if I couldn't get comfortable in the water, I could not get comfortable in the car. Like, there was nothing I could do to kind of take any of that pressure away. And so in the car, I was like, yeah, this is the right choice. I would not want to have to do this for almost an hour. Then we got there, and by the time we got to the hospital, I was at a 5, so I had done the hard work of another centimeter, so that was exciting. And they got me checked in, and they gave me the monitor, the portable monitor. And I when I thought about transferring, I always told myself, like, I'm going to do minimal intervention. I'm going to request no monitoring. I'm going to do this. And then, but the fact that I had been in labor for so long, I wanted all of the things. I was starting to get nervous about his health, about where he was, if he was stressed, because I was stressed because it had been so long. I knew there, my waters were broken. So I was like, bring it on. And I'll tell you what, I think I hurt longer from that portable monitor where they like sandpaper your skin to like get it to stick to you. That wound was the longest healing of anything that happened in the hospital. I felt that on my stomach for 2 weeks after. I mean, it was insane. And when she started, I was like, what are you doing? She was like, I've got to make it stick. And it stuck. So anyways, we did the portable monitor, got up to the room, and unfortunately I had to decide who I wanted in that space. And so we also had a birth photographer, and I knew that she would be coming in and out. And so we could only have 3 people plus the birth photographer. And so I had my husband, my mom, and then my friend Shelby. We were trying to figure out if she was going to come or if she was going to stay, and she wanted to come. And so unfortunately, Maureen went with me to the hospital to transfer me, gave them all the paperwork, and was a wonderful support in that process. But then she and her assistant Christine went back to my house to take everything down, and they took a nap at the house, kind of just checked in. So it was unfortunate that I kind of had to pick and choose because Maureen had been there from the beginning and was just such a great support throughout the whole thing. I was really disappointed to not be able to have her in the room with me. But it was tough. It was a tough call. But I'm pretty sure she ended up having somebody else go into labor, so it kind of worked out, if I'm remembering correctly. We got up in the room, and the doctor came in, and I was having contractions, and he was like, you're doing pretty good. I was like, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate you saying that. And he was like, yeah, you're doing good to be, in a 5. And I was like, awesome. And he said that he asked me about trying Pitocin. So he did ask. And at the point we were at, I was like, yeah, I do think that that's a good idea. I think that I need to try and get these going. And as soon as he said that, though, I said, I want the epidural first. And he was like, oh, I was like, yeah, if you're going to give me Pitocin, I want the epidural first. I have been doing this. At this point, too, I was so exhausted. I was tired on a whole other level. In the 30 hours that I think we were at this point, I had maybe slept for, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours, maybe 4. I was so tired. So I also knew that I needed to rest if I wanted to deliver vaginally. I knew I would need to get some sleep to be able to push. And so I got the epidural, which was not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I had my music so that I could focus on that, and our lovely nurse sat there with me, and she just held me, and I focused on the music, and I told the doctor, please do not tell me anything that you're doing. I'm just going to sit here, and you do what you need to do and leave me out of it. And I'm a very queasy person. And it was great. It went by so fast. It went by so quick. And of course I had a contraction in the middle of them giving me this epidural, because why wouldn't I? But it wasn't that bad. And then they got the epidural in, and then they started the Pitocin, and by 10 o'clock I was at a 7. So that was good news. And the baby was still looking fine. His heart rate was fine. They were monitoring my temperature really closely just to check for signs of infection. And we just kind of hung out. I got to sleep. I got to take a good nap, which was, I think, what my body needed too, because that's when I started to dilate more, was whenever I was sleeping. So it was a good call. It was 10 out of 10. I would do it again. I was so tired. But yeah, at this point, we kind of turned the music off. There's music going this whole time, the different playlists and things like that. And that was one of my husband's jobs, was to kind of look at the moment and decide and play my requests and things like that. But I had turned the music off because it was the daytime and we were all just kind of hanging out and we watched Star Trek. My husband and I are big Trekkies, and, there's a picture from our birth photographer of like my laptop sitting in front of me, and it's like Star Trek and like some snacks.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was so funny to see like how just that medication changed my birth from one that was like quiet and calm and which was wonderful. I absolutely love that. But then like the next day when I had the medication, like we're all sitting there talking and laughing and, doing the things and hanging out. And so it was kind of interesting to see that shift. I was bummed. They requested that I stay on my back. Honestly, I was too tired to really do anything anyways. I didn't have any interest. At one point I did ask to sit up. I had horrible reflux from an icy that I ate a couple hours before I started pushing, and it stayed with me until he was out. It was just awful reflux. So yeah, I started pushing at like, I think it was like 5. The doctors switched over. The doctor that was there in the morning came in and he was like, I'm so sorry I have to leave. I'm so bummed that I can't stay. I really wanted us to be able to do this together. So he was very lovely. But the doctor that came in was a big music person, and he came in and like saw my speaker was on and we're sitting there, and, he's like vibing with us, rocking along. So he was pretty cool. It was fun. And then I started pushing, and I pushed on my back. And I was still exhausted. I was still, even with the sleep, I was still really tired. At one point, I was like falling asleep in between pushes, and just for a brief mini micro nap, I was so tired. And we did the thing with the sheet, and the nurse was holding the sheet, and then my husband would pull the sheet, and that was pretty cool. But eventually I found I pushed best when I was holding my feet. Like I wanted to hold my feet up. My mom, bless her heart, my mom had one foot and one knee, and she really, really wanted me to like bear down with my legs, but I had still had the epidural and I couldn't really feel my legs. And so I would go to push, and she would like push my knee back up to my head. And I was like, Mom, I need you to really stop trying to force this. Like, I'm trying to figure it out. She was trying so hard. She'd like cram my leg back. And I was like, that's not helping. It's just distracting me. I can't focus. But once I finally found it, they brought in the mirror, and that was really cool to like watch what was happening. And then I did tear, and my friend Shelby, bless her heart, knows that I do not do blood well. And so as soon as she was like, like moves the mirror out of my sight. And then, yeah, I pushed for an hour and a half. I was singing in between pushes to kind of keep myself focused and keep my spirits lifted, because I was ready to be done. I was ready to be done. I liked pushing, but I was done. At this point, it was, I think, like 40 some hours. It was a long time, maybe 39. And yeah, it was a 60s and 70s playlist, which is something that I did not practice anything with. It was just what I wanted to listen to. It's my comfort music, the music that my dad listened to when I was younger. And so, we're just kind of in there jamming. And finally he came out, and I got to catch him, which was super awesome. And I got to pull him up to my chest. And I'm thankful that I didn't know this at the time, but his heart rate had skyrocketed, and I had a pretty high fever. So we were kind of like right on that cusp of it becoming too dangerous. And so I'm very thankful that they told me after the fact, because I very well could have panicked and shut down. So we got there, and he made it out, and got him on my chest, and he was crying, and his umbilical cord was completely white. Whenever he came out, he was like spent. He took all of it. So we got that clipped. Yeah. And then, yeah, we just did our skin to skin, and I had a birthing playlist like for delivery. And I sang to him. That was one of the first things. And so those pictures are some of my favorite. We're all crying. Everybody in the room is crying as I'm like singing to Berkeley. And it was so sweet. It was such a great moment.
That's really neat. Thank you for taking the time to walk us through that. I definitely felt like I could feel the emotions and things move with you. I have a strong belief that who is in the birth room is who's meant to be there. And I love that when you transferred, you had people that were really supportive and kind, and it sounds like respected certain boundaries and respected you as a person, which I think is incredible, even down to the end, not bringing up things that could cause panic or otherwise, whereas I feel like the majority of the time those things are brought up even earlier than necessary. So I feel like you have some really positive parts of your story. And I love that you're sharing that, because transfers do occur. And when they do, they're for a reason. And they can be a really wonderful experience with a really great outcome. So I'm really glad that you got to share that with the hundreds of thousands of women that get to listen to this. So that's pretty powerful. And I really appreciate that. Before we jump off, I always like to ask, though, if you could give advice, your very best advice to mom and very best advice to dad, just like if you could sum it up in a sentence or two, what would that look like?
Yeah. So for dad, I would say follow her lead and be prepared to take it if you need to. So if she needs you to be that person that's rallying for her, be that person, but then also, be mindful of where you're at within her space, and just follow her lead. My husband was wonderful about, kind of just being my partner there. And then when he needed to, kind of stepping in and saying, and we were very lucky to not have really any instances that felt confrontational by any means. But I know that isn't always the experience. So just be prepared to be both. And then for moms, I would say I have this little nugget of wisdom that isn't necessarily strictly for birth, but it helped me with my transition and in processing my labor as a whole. It was given to me by one of my professors when I was in school. And it's just a little quote. It says, "Blessed are the flexible, for they never get bent out of shape." And this is a phrase that I really try to live by everywhere in my life, is to just, be flexible in my decisions and things like that. But especially in labor, make the plan. I had the plan, and I don't regret making the plan at all. But I think my grace and my ability to maintain flexible is what allowed me to still have such a positive experience, even though it wasn't exactly what I wanted, because now my baby is here and he's healthy and we had a good experience and everybody's happy. And I think, it's just a testament to being able to stay flexible in the moment and not seeing changes as a reflection of a failure or, unpreparedness on your part. And, don't get bent out of shape by it. So, yeah.
I like that a lot. I also like that along with your birth story, in every part you had a say. So like kind of like we talk about the birth map, right? That there's different directions that you can take, but like you having a say throughout your experience is like the most important part. So you're like, I could have stayed. The midwives were happy with me staying here. I chose. So when I chose to go to the hospital, when I chose to have the epidural, like these things, you had a choice all along the way. And I just think that speaks volumes to how you felt, afterwards. Yeah. And also just like you were talking about, making sure you have that flexibility. So really powerful. Thank you. I really appreciate your story. I appreciate your time. I want to thank you for being here with me and for everybody listening today. Patricia, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you loved what you heard today, the very best way to support this podcast and help other moms to find it is to leave a quick review. I read one at the beginning of the episodes, and I would love for yours to be next. And if you're ready for even more pregnancy, birth, and postpartum goodness, come join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I will hold your hand and walk you through pregnancy and birth step by step so you're totally prepared for a birth you'll love. See you next week.